Am I predisposed to nuclear radiation? That may sound like an absurd, crazy question, but when I tell you why I'm sitting here thinking if I am predisposed to nuclear radiation and if in fact I may have some lingering effects from generational radiation, it'll make more sense to you. My grandmother moved to America from Japan. She was a little girl during the atomic bombings of Japan in World War II. She was exposed to nuclear radiation from being in or near Nagasaki, Japan, when she was a little girl. So my grandmother was actually a child when World War II happened and when Japan was bombed. Thus, she was exposed to nuclear radiation and radiation fallout. She moved to America because she met my grandfather during the Korean War. He was in the Marines. And from what I understand, the Marines would not let him marry my grandmother because she was Japanese. They had a rule against that. So once he was finished with his time as a Marine, he did not re-enlist with the Marines, but instead he enlisted with the United States Army, and the Army would allow him to remain an active service member and also marry my grandmother. My grandmother came to America on a boat. She couldn't even travel with my grandfather on a plane, so she had to take a boat from Japan to America. They settled down in New Orleans, and they had 5 children. My mother was the second child from them, and of course, she was half Japanese. Later on, my grandmother passes away while giving birth to what I think would have been my uncle. I have all aunts, so my mom and all her sisters. It was 5 girls, and my grandmother was giving birth to another child, and I think it was going to be her first son, or no, her second son, because I do have an uncle in Japan who's full-blooded Japanese, where because my grandmother had a child before she met my grandfather. Anyway, so she moves to America. And she has my mom and my aunts, and they grow up, and now they have grandchildren, and we have children, and thus the cycle continues. But I am the grandchild of a woman, my grandmother, who was exposed to nuclear radiation. Now, if you know anything about Japan during World War II, there was a lot of studies about nuclear radiation and its effects or after effects of the people who survived the nuclear fallout. I do not believe, from what I understand, I could be wrong on this, that my grandmother had ever been tested or, studied for any of the nuclear radiation. But I do know that from talking to one of my aunts, at least that I can recall having conversation with, is that they did contact my aunts because they knew that they were descendants, they were Japanese, and they wanted to study the effects here in America, and they were looking for Japanese people who had been predisposed to nuclear radiation. From what I understand, I don't know how all that went. I probably was a young kid when that happened, but so yeah, there was an interest in studying them and taking their vitals, probably taking blood work, et cetera, saliva, so they can test them to see if they had any, remnants of radiation. I don't know how that goes, but there is that thought in my head that maybe, just maybe, that me and my cousins, or my brother, God bless him, he's not with us anymore, but my cousins still are, and myself, could we possibly have any after effects, since we are the third generation? Could we have after effects of the radiation as well, since we are also, genetically, inclined to a grandparent who was exposed to radiation? Just the stuff I think of while I'm sitting here. So, I really wonder, should I get radiation test? And listen, they've already been tested. The tests have already been done on a lot of descendants of World War II Japan. And from what I understand, they say that a lot of people didn't have radiation exposure for third and fourth generations. They're studying like fourth and fifth generations too, from people who were exposed to, to their grandparents or great grandparents were exposed to the radiation in Japan. But I'm literally third generation. So, my mom was, directly, born from someone who was exposed to nuclear radiation. There's not a lot of people in the world who are alive who can say that their descendants were directly impacted from an atomic bomb and the fallout and radiation thereof. So it's definitely an interesting topic for me to sit here and ponder and think about. Listen, I'm not a nuclear physicist. I'm not a scientist who studies radiation. I worked in the oil and gas field. A lot of dangerous chemicals I worked around, so I understand what dangerous chemicals can do. I understand what mustard gas is. I understand why the Geneva Convention banned the use of gases during war. So I have some understanding of some things, but I don't understand the physics of nuclear fusion and atomic bombs. I understand the effects and how dangerous it is. And in an instant, how a couple atomic bombs put Japan in its place and laid a lot of places flat. I understand that Chernobyl was an exploded nuclear site, and they're still having effects in animals to this very day that are deformed. And Chernobyl was much worse than the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima in Japan. Chernobyl is, they still got animals with like 2 heads, fish with 3 tails, crazy stuff. So you telling me that if the nuclear radiation is causing effects on the animals, the third and fourth generations of Japanese descendants are or are not still having effects of radiation? I don't know. Maybe it made them smarter. Maybe that's why the Japanese are so smart. It's because the radiation didn't do a negative effect. It had a positive effect. Who knows? But that's my thoughts on me sitting here wondering, because I was just wondering that. Do I have any radiation effects? Who knows? Share in the comments what you think. Does it seem like, from me talking, that I got any effects from radiation? Some people think I'm a little bit far-fetched, radical, extreme, my personality type. I don't know, that's just the way I am. My dad ain't Japanese, he's French and Swedish and everything else like that. And so maybe I just get my personality from him, and it's not actually from nuclear radiation. Man, that was just my thoughts, man, to share with y'all. But give me a like and subscribe to the Pen and the Shank. Let's get it.